The grand hall was alive with the echoes of excitement and tension, a symphony of whispers and rustling silk, punctuated occasionally by the sharp clink of silver goblets. Today marked the mating ritual, the most anticipated event of the season, where alphas and omegas alike sought bonds that could define their lives. The air was thick with the heady scent of blooming night flowers, their fragrance drifting lazily across the marble floor, entwining with the nervous anticipation of the attendees. Every pair of eyes in the room seemed to scan for potential matches, assessing, judging, weighing futures with a silent, unforgiving precision. At the edge of the grand hall stood Lyra, a young omega whose heart had already endured too many silent rejections. She was slender, almost fragile in appearance, with hair cascading like liquid dusk over her shoulders, eyes that reflected a quiet sorrow, and a posture that spoke of someone used to being overlooked. Her pulse fluttered violently in her chest, a relentless drum that seemed to announce her unworthiness to everyone around her. She had been rejected many times before, seen the flicker of polite disinterest in the eyes of countless alphas, but she had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that this year might be different. But the cruel inevitability of her reality settled over her like a shroud. The Omega's expression faltered as a group of prominent alphas passed by, their gazes sliding over her without so much as acknowledgement. Lyra's shoulders sagged, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the hem of her gown. The room seemed to spin around her, a blur of laughter, whispered conversations, and the relentless display of perfect unions forming under the opulent chandeliers. Her heart ached, not just from the sting of repeated rejection, but from a deeper, more personal longing for acceptance, for recognition, for someone who would see her not as invisible, but as worthy. As she retreated toward a shadowed corner, wishing she could simply vanish into the walls, her foot caught on the hem of an elaborate rug. Time slowed, as it often does in moments of inevitable catastrophe, and she felt herself pitching forward, the world tilting at an alarming angle. Gasps of startled guests echoed around her, mingling with the sudden crash of a silver tray she knocked from a nearby table. And then, she felt strong arms wrap around her, a solid presence that arrested her fall and anchored her in place. Lyra's eyes flew open to meet those of a man who seemed to belong to a different world entirely. He was an alpha, undeniably commanding, with an aura of authority that radiated from him in waves. Broad shoulders, a jawline carved as if from stone, and eyes that shimmered like molten amber, eyes that were studying her with a calm, almost unnerving intensity. "You're clumsy," he said softly, his voice deep, smooth, resonant, yet oddly gentle in its reprimand. Lyra's breath caught, her words failing her as she stammered a feeble apology. The entire hall seemed to blur around her, the cacophony of chatter and laughter fading to a dull hum as she realized she was being held in the arms of none other than the Alpha King himself, the most revered, feared, and respected alpha in all the territories. A man who commanded loyalty with a single glance, whose presence alone could silence a room. And yet, in that unexpected proximity, Lyra felt something wholly unanticipated: safety. A warmth that defied her long-held belief that she was unworthy, unseen, unimportant. He had caught her, not out of obligation, not out of duty, but with deliberate care, as if her fall had mattered to him in ways she could not yet comprehend. The king's amber eyes softened, and for a fleeting moment, Lyra dared to believe that she was seen, not just her body or her position in the social hierarchy, but her. "Are you all right?" His voice broke the spell of the moment, yet it held an unspoken weight, a command for honesty. Lyra nodded, though her voice trembled. "Why, yes. Thank you, Alpha King." He inclined his head slightly, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I do not often find omegas in peril in my presence. You should be more careful." She blinked, trying to find words, but the embarrassment of the fall, combined with the intensity of his gaze, rendered her mute. It was then that she realized something crucial, something that had been absent from her life for as long as she could remember. She felt noticed, truly noticed. The moment was fleeting, yet it lingered in her mind long after she was escorted back to the periphery of the hall, back to the shadows she had inhabited for years. But something had shifted, something in the way he had held her, the way his amber eyes had scanned her with what seemed like deliberate attention, left an indelible mark on her heart. And though Lyra did not yet understand it, the trajectory of her life was about to change forever. For sometimes, it takes only one moment, one collision of fate, to awaken a destiny that has been patiently waiting in the wings. One that could turn rejection into recognition, loneliness into Belen. The mating ritual continued to swirl around Lyra like a storm, each moment stretching her nerves taut, testing her resolve. Even as she returned to the periphery of the grand hall, the warmth of the Alpha King's arms lingered on her skin, a memory she could not shake. It clung to her like a gentle flame, igniting a strange mixture of fear and hope in her chest. Every graceful step she took seemed heavy with self-consciousness. Every whispered conversation from the Alphas and Omegas nearby a reminder that she was still, in their eyes, just another Omega, fragile, overlooked, expendable. Yet something inside her had shifted. The encounter had planted a seed, a fragile ember of possibility that dared to whisper, "Perhaps I am worthy. Perhaps someone does see me." She tightened her fingers around the folds of her gown, trying to anchor herself as she moved past the ornate tables, past the laughing clusters of couples who had already found their matches. Each laugh, each playful glance, stabbed at her confidence, yet she could not tear her thoughts away from the memory of his amber gaze. The king had looked at her as if she mattered, not as a mere Omega to be selected or dismissed, but as someone whose presence demanded attention. Lyra found herself near the balcony at the far end of the hall, overlooking the sprawling gardens beyond. Moonlight streamed through the open doors, painting silver patterns on the marble floor and reflecting in her wide, haunted eyes. She drew a deep breath, attempting to steady the storm inside her, but the cool night air only reminded her of how small she felt in a world that seemed determined to ignore her. Her reflection in the polished marble of the railing seemed almost alien, an Omega whose beauty was overlooked, whose heart was too tender for the harshness of this society. A sudden movement caught her attention. The hall, despite its grandeur, had begun to thin slightly as couples wandered toward the garden or secluded corners to continue their private discussions. And then she saw him, again. The Alpha King, standing near the center of the hall, surveying the room with a gaze that seemed to hold the weight of mountains, yet somehow softened when it fell upon her. Her pulse quickened, a frantic drum that threatened to betray her composure. He had not forgotten her, she realized with a mix of relief and awe. The faintest flicker of recognition passed over his features, a subtle arch of his brow that suggested he remembered the stumble, remembered the moment she had fallen into his arms. Lyra's mind raced. What did it mean that he noticed her? That he had paused, however briefly, to see her in a room filled with thousands? Her instincts told her to retreat, to hide, to protect herself from inevitable disappointment, but another, quieter voice whispered the possibility of something else, something daring. Go toward him. Let him see you. Let him decide for himself. And so, with trembling steps, she moved. Each footfall felt heavy, yet purposeful, carrying her closer to the center of the hall where destiny seemed to linger. Conversations around her blurred into indistinct murmurs. The chandeliers became hazy shapes overhead. All that existed was him. And the inexplicable pull of something greater than herself, an invisible thread tying her to him. The king's eyes met hers again, and this time, he moved. Not with the commanding force of a ruler demanding attention, but with the deliberate, controlled elegance of a predator assessing his territory, and her place within it. He approached, each step measured, echoing across the polished floor. Guests subtly shifted aside, sensing the aura of authority that radiated from him, yet Lyra remained rooted to the spot, unable to step back even if she had wanted to. You have courage, he said softly, his voice carrying across the hushed hall. It is a rare thing to see an Omega hold her ground in a place where she could easily be ignored. Lyra's breath caught, her tongue twisting around her reply. I don't mean to cause trouble, Alpha King. He shook his head slightly, a gesture both dismissive and intimate, as if he were brushing away her doubt. You are not trouble, he corrected. You are different. And difference is something the world rarely rewards, yet it is often what it needs most. Her chest tightened at his words. Different. She had always felt different, strange, ill-fitted for the role society demanded of her. And yet here he was, acknowledging that very difference, framing it not as a flaw but as a strength. Her heart fluttered against her ribs, an erratic rhythm of hope and fear. The king extended a hand, not in a command, but in an invitation. Come with me. There are things in this world you have yet to see. And perhaps, there are things in you that are waiting to be discovered. Lyra hesitated, her mind a whirlwind of doubt and longing. Yet the memory of her countless rejections, her loneliness, and the sting of invisibility faded beneath the warmth of possibility. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. The world around her seemed to tilt, then steady, as if acknowledging that her life had irrevocably shifted course. As he led her through the hall, the whispers of the guests faded behind them. Lyra's steps were tentative at first, then firmer, guided not just by his hand but by the courage she found in her own heart. Outside, the moonlit gardens awaited, a sanctuary away from the judging eyes, where the world seemed to pause, giving her a moment to breathe, to exist, to be. And in that stillness, Lyra realized something profound. Perhaps rejection had not been her end, but the prelude to a story far greater than she had ever dared to imagine. Perhaps in the arms of destiny, and under the gaze of the Alpha King, she could finally find what she had longed for all her life. Acceptance, belonging, and a love that could endure beyond the trials of the world. The gardens stretched before them like a hidden kingdom beneath the silver gaze of T. He Moon. Every pathway was lined with luminous flowers whose petals seemed to catch the light and hold it, creating a gentle glow that guided their steps. The night air was cool, perfumed with the scent of jasmine and night-blooming roses, a balm to Lyra's still trembling nerves. For the first time since the mating ritual began, she felt a fragile sense of peace, a reprieve from the constant pressure of judgment and expectation that had defined her existence. The Alpha King walked beside her, his presence a steady, unwavering force that seemed to anchor her in a world that had long been indifferent to her. He did not speak immediately, allowing her to adjust to the strange intimacy of being led by a hand that held authority without command. Each step she took beside him felt monumental, as though the very act of walking beside this man, this legendary Alpha, was itself a declaration of worth. Finally, he stopped at a secluded fountain, its waters glimmering like liquid silver in the moonlight. The gentle trickle of water filled the silence between them, a natural cadence that seemed to slow time. Lyra looked at him, the questions she had carried for so long pressing on her lips, yet she found herself unable to speak. His gaze met hers, amber eyes reflecting a depth that seemed to pierce through every layer of doubt she had built around herself. "You are afraid," he stated, not as a question but as an observation, precise and unflinching. Lyra swallowed hard, her throat tight. I have been," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am, used to being overlooked, used to being dismissed before anyone ever truly sees me." He nodded slowly, as though weighing her words carefully. "The world has no place for weakness, for those who hide. Yet in hiding, you forget the strength you already possess. You have endured more than most, and yet here you are, standing." Her breath caught at the weight of his words. He was not offering empty praise, nor pity, there was a recognition in his tone, a clarity that made her feel as though he saw the entirety of her, both the fractures and the resilience. You noticed me back there," she murmured, unsure why she felt compelled to voice such a fragile thought. "When I fell, you didn't just save me. She trailed off, uncertainty weaving through her words. "I did," he confirmed, his voice low and unwavering. "Because even then, I saw what others ignored. There is a fire within you, Lyra, one that refuses to be extinguished. That fire deserves more than polite indifference. It deserves recognition and care, and, perhaps, more than you realize." Her heart thudded wildly, a mix of fear and hope that seemed almost dangerous in its intensity. She wanted to retreat, to protect herself from the possibility of D.'s appointment, yet the sincerity in his gaze held her rooted. She had never been treated as if she were more than invisible, yet here he was, acknowledging her not just for what she was, but for what she might become. For a long moment, they simply stood there, the sound of the fountain filling the silence. Lyra's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one more fragile and desperate than the last. And then, in the quiet of the garden, she realized she wanted to trust him. Not because he was the Alpha King, not because of the power he wielded, but because of the way he saw her, not as an omega to be claimed, but as a person, whole and worthy. He stepped closer, just enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him without being overbearing. "The world will test you," he said, his tone almost gentle, almost intimate. It will judge you harshly for your past, for your fears, for your very existence. But I will not. And perhaps, if you allow it, I can help you see the strength you possess for yourself. Lyra's fingers curled slightly, as though grasping at the possibility of hope itself. She had spent years doubting her own worth, hiding behind the veil of rejection and isolation. And yet, with him, there was the first whisper of a new reality, a reality where her worth was not measured by the acceptance of the indifferent, but by the recognition of someone who truly saw her. I want to believe that, she admitted softly, her voice trembling, yet sincere. I want to believe that I'm more than what they say I am. The Alpha King's expression softened in a way that was rare, almost tender. Then you will, he said, his words carrying a promise that resonated deep within her. And together, we will face whatever the world throws at us. You will not be alone. For the first time in her life, Lyra allowed herself to imagine a future where rejection did not define her, where she could exist not merely as an omega to be overlooked, but as someone worthy of love, respect, and belonging. And in that garden, under the watchful gaze of the moon, with the Alpha King by her side, she felt the fragile stirrings of courage begin to bloom into something stronger. The fountain's waters shimmered between them, a silent witness to the unspoken bond forming, the delicate first threads of trust and understanding weaving around them. Lyra knew, with a certainty that surprised her, that her life had shifted irrevocably in the span of a single night. And while the path ahead would no doubt be fraught with trials and societal pressures, for the first time, she felt capable of facing them, not alone, but with someone who saw her for who she truly was. As they walked through the moonlit paths together, side by side, Lyra realized that her heart no longer trembled solely in fear. It beat with anticipation, with hope, and with the quiet thrill of a future that had once seemed impossible, but now shimmered within reach, like the gentle glow of the garden flowers under the silvery night sky. The morning after the mating ritual dawned with a golden haze, sunlight streaming through the tall windows of the royal palace and spilling across the polished marble floors. Lyra awoke in her modest chambers, her thoughts still tangled in the events of the night before. Her heart fluttered involuntarily as she recalled the Alpha King's touch, his amber eyes, and the way he had seen her, not as a dismissed omega, not as a fragile bystander in society's harsh game, but as someone of worth. Yet, even as hope stirred within her, a gnawing anxiety threatened to pull her back under the weight of reality. The palace corridors were no refuge from whispers, from the subtle glances cast her way, or the pointed comments carefully veiled in polite concern. For in a world ruled by hierarchy, where alphas were revered and omegas often sidelined, any deviation from expectation invited scrutiny. And now, after the Alpha King's evident attention, Lyra knew that the eyes of society were upon her in a way they had never been before. She dressed carefully, her fingers lingering over the soft fabric of her gown, a gift of modest luxury she had received as an unexpected courtesy after the mating ritual. Each stitch, each detail, seemed a reminder of the dichotomy she lived in, visible yet invisible, recognized yet still judged. The servants moved silently around her, offering whispered greetings, and she smiled politely, concealing the storm of anticipation and dread within. Outside the palace, the courtyard was alive with activity. Guards patrolled the perimeter, and servants moved swiftly between the fountains and gardens, while nobles gathered in clusters, murmuring softly. Word traveled quickly in such a world, and she could feel the weight of their attention even from a distance. Her every movement seemed exaggerated under the invisible spotlight cast by gossip and speculation. It was then that he appeared, the Alpha King. Clad in his regal attire, the weight of authority in his posture, yet with a softness reserved only for her, he approached through the courtyard. Each step he took seemed measured, deliberate, and the air around him seemed to hum with power. Lyra felt a shiver run down her spine, a mix of anticipation and apprehension. "Good morning, Lyra," he said, his voice steady yet imbued with warmth. "Are you well?" Lyra nodded, her voice catching slightly. I am, Alpha King. Thank you for," she paused, unsure how to phrase her gratitude. Last night had felt surreal, a crossing of invisible thresholds that she had never dared to imagine. "Come," he interrupted gently, a subtle command woven into the cadence of his words, yet devoid of condescension. There is much to discuss, and the world outside these walls is less forgiving than the sanctuary of the gardens. He led her to a quiet chamber overlooking the palace's main courtyard, a room rarely used and bathed in soft morning light. The walls were lined with ancient tapestries depicting the lineage of the Alpha Kings, their achievements, their alliances, and their victories immortalized in intricate threads. Lyra's eyes wandered over the images, absorbing the weight of history, and the realization struck her: she was stepping into a world that had long been inaccessible, a world where every action carried consequence. The king's amber eyes settled on her, and the warmth in their gaze contrasted sharply with the weight of the world surrounding them. "Lyra," he said carefully, "you must understand that the attention you now receive is not without consequence. The noble families, the other alphas, they will watch you closely. Some may admire you, some may resent you, and some will seek to manipulate the situation for their own gain." Her chest tightened at his words. She had imagined challenges, yes, but the reality of navigating court politics, of surviving the scrutiny of those who had the power to shape her life, was far more daunting than she had expected. Yet the king's presence provided a strange comfort, a reminder that she was not entirely alone in facing these trials. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Do not be afraid, Lyra. The world may not always understand you, but I will stand by you. We will face this together. You must trust not only me but also yourself. Your strength lies not in hiding from the world, but in confronting it with courage and honesty." Lyra nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of his words. Courage had always seemed a distant concept, a luxury reserved for those born into privilege or power. Yet here, in this quiet chamber, with the Alpha King's unwavering attention, she felt the first true flicker of determination ignite within her. Perhaps she could rise above the whispers, the judgment, the rejection. Perhaps she could claim a place in this world, not just as a passive observer, but as someone who had a voice, a presence, and even influence. The door creaked open suddenly, and a messenger entered with a scroll sealed with crimson wax. The king's expression hardened slightly as he broke the seal, scanning the contents quickly. Lyra watched the change in him with an unsteady pulse. He was formidable not just in appearance, but in intellect, command, and the ability to navigate crises. "They challenge your position," he said, his voice tight with controlled authority. "There are alphas who resent the attention I have shown you. Some question your suitability, others aim to test your resolve. This is the first of many trials, Lyra." Her stomach knotted, fear and determination warring within her. She had known life would not grant her easy victories, yet the magnitude of what lay ahead was almost overwhelming. And yet, when she looked at him, at the king who had seen her and chosen to stand by her, she felt a surge of resolve. "I will not falter," she said quietly, but firmly. "I will face whatever comes, and I will prove that I am more than they believe." He nodded, a faint, approving smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Good. That is the spirit that will carry you forward. Remember, Lyra, the world may judge harshly, but it is your heart and your courage that define your worth, not their opinions." As she left the chamber, flanked by the Alpha King's quiet protection, Lyra realized that this day marked the true beginning of her journey. No longer was she a rejected Omega, invisible and overlooked. She was a force to be reckoned with, standing at the threshold of a life filled with challenge, revelation, and perhaps, if destiny allowed it, a love that would endure beyond every trial. The courtyard stretched before her like an arena of possibility. And as she walked with the king by her side, Lyra understood something profound. The world could test her, judge her, and challenge her at every turn, but she was no longer afraid. For the first time in her life, she believed that she could rise, and that the heart that had been rejected time and again could, at last, find its rightful place. The sun had barely begun its climb over the palace walls when Lyra found herself walking through the wide corridors of the royal estate, the echoes of her steps mingling with the distant murmur of servants and guards attending to their morning duties. Despite the gentle warmth of the sun spilling through the arched windows, a chill lingered in her chest, a foreboding tension she could not yet name. The whispers had begun. Though the mating ritual had ended with her unexpected encounter with the Alpha King, not all eyes in the kingdom had been kind. Some alphas, notable for their influence and pride, were already murmuring among themselves, questioning why such attention had been shown to a previously overlooked Omega. Others simply glared in silent resentment, their expressions sharp with envy. The court, as always, was a delicate dance of power, and Lyra, with all her insecurities, felt acutely aware that she had stumbled onto a stage far larger than she had ever imagined. As she turned a corner, she caught sight of two alphas conversing in hushed tones. Their eyes flicked toward her, cold and calculating, and she felt the prickling sensation of scrut. Any that had followed her for as long as she could remember. She paused, pretending to adjust the folds of her gown, her pulse quickening. She could hear the faint, venomous undertone of their voices, though the words themselves were just out of reach. The Alpha King's presence was no longer beside her, and the vulnerability she had long buried began to rise again. Yet, somewhere deep within, she remembered the warmth of his amber eyes, the certainty of his protection. A small, determined flame ignited in her chest. She would not shrink from this world any longer, not if she could summon the courage to stand tall, to face these shadows, and claim the recognition she had been denied for so long. As the day unfolded, it became increasingly clear that the jealousy she had sensed was more than idle gossip. Invitations were quietly rescinded, subtle slights were delivered under the guise of courtesy, and the once neutral glances of other nobles had become sharp and assessing. Lyra's every move was watched, her every word noted and dissected. It was a trial unlike any she had faced, testing her resolve, her composure, and the strength she had only begun to realize within herself. She sought refuge in the gardens, the same moonlit sanctuary from the night before now bathed in the golden light of morning. The roses were vivid, their petals kissed by dew, and the fountain's water gleamed with crystalline clarity. Here, she could breathe, away from the prying eyes and the silent judgments. And it was here, amidst the serenity of nature, that the Alpha King found her. "You look troubled," he observed, his voice low and measured. His amber eyes held the same intensity as before, scanning her with quiet concern. "The palace can be unkind, Lyra. And some will never forgive what they cannot understand." She turned to him, her chest tight with conflicting emotions. "It's difficult," she admitted softly. "They judge me without knowing me. They question why anyone, would care about someone like me." Her voice wavered, betraying the depth of the hurt she had long carried. He stepped closer, the weight of his presence both grounding and reassuring. "And yet," he said, his tone firm but not harsh, "here you are. You are standing in spite of them. That is courage, Lyra. And it is far more powerful than the whispers of the envious or the judgmental." His words struck a chord deep within her. For so long, she had defined herself through the eyes of others, through rejection, through the dismissal she had suffered since she could remember. And yet, here he was, reminding her that her worth was not dictated by their opinions. It was a revelation, startling in its simplicity and profound in its impact. "I want to be strong," she whispered, almost to herself. "I want to ace them without fear." He reached out, lightly brushing a strand of hair from her face, a gesture intimate yet respectful. "You are stronger than you realize. Each time you face them, each time you hold your ground, you grow stronger. And you are not alone. I will stand by you, Lyra, not to fight their battles for you, but to ensure you never have to face them unprepared." The day stretched on, each encounter a test of patience and resilience. Noble families subtly tried to undermine her, questioning her intentions, her character, even her capability to navigate the complex social structures of the court. Yet with each challenge, Lyra felt a shift within herself. Where once she would have cowered, she now stood tall, meeting cold glances with steady resolve. The lessons of rejection, of loneliness, of invisibility, had forged a quiet strength in her that only now she began to appreciate. By evening, the sun dipped low, casting the palace in hues of amber and rose. The courtyard, now quiet, offered her a moment of reprieve. The Alpha King joined her, his presence a silent promise of support. Together, they watched the sun slip below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant streaks of color. "You are learning," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Not just to endure, but to rise above. And the world will take notice, whether they wish to or not." Lyra turned to him, gratitude shining in her eyes. "I feel different," she admitted softly. "As if for the first time, I am not just surviving, but becoming someone I could be proud of." He nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. You should be proud, Lyra. Every step you take, every moment you claim for yourself, is a victory. And I am honored to witness it. As twilight settled over the palace, Lyra felt a newfound determination take root. The whispers of jealousy, the subtle hostility, even the weight of centuries of expectation could not diminish the spark that now burned within her. With the Alpha King by her side, and with the strength she had unearthed in herself, she understood that she was no longer merely a rejected Omega. She was a force, capable of standing in her own light, ready to face the trials and joys that lay ahead. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that love, acceptance, and belonging were not distant dreams, but attainable realities, waiting just beyond the shadows of fear and doubt. The days that followed the whispered confrontations in the palace corridors were both exhausting and illuminating for Lyra. Each sunrise brought with it a subtle battle, a test of courage, patience, and poise. Yet alongside these challenges was a growing realization, a quiet, insistent awareness, that she was no longer the timid, overlooked Omega she had been for so long. With every glance from the Alpha King, every carefully measured word of encouragement, she felt herself evolving, stepping into a version of herself that had always been possible but remained hidden beneath layers of fear and rejection. This particular morning, the palace was alive with the usual bustle. Servants hurried between chambers, noble families exchanged guarded greetings, and the clatter of guards' boots on polished marble echoed down the corridors. Yet beneath the routine, an undercurrent of tension hummed. Lyra had begun to notice the subtle ways in which some alphas, those whose pride could not tolerate her presence near the king, tested her resolve. Invitations were scrutinized, conversations were laced with insinuation, and every move she made seemed to ripple through the court, magnified by judgmental eyes. Lyra moved through the halls with deliberate care, her hands lightly brushing the edges of her gown as if to anchor herself. Her mind raced, cataloging each interaction, each nuance of expression, trying to anticipate threats she had no power to fully control. And yet, there was a strange sense of exhilaration beneath the anxiety, a knowledge that each trial she survived was proof of her own growing strength. The Alpha King found her near the sunlit balcony overlooking the city below. His approach was silent yet commanding, a presence that drew attention without demanding it. When he spoke, it was with the same steady warmth that had begun to settle into her heart. "You have grown," he said simply, as if stating a fact. His amber eyes scanned her with a depth of understanding that left her simultaneously exposed and protected. "Stronger than you realize. The world tests you because it senses your potential, and not all will be pleased with it. You must learn to stand firm, not just for yourself, but for those who cannot yet see what you are capable of becoming." Lyra's lips parted, a faint smile tugging at the corners. I am learning," she admitted. "Though it is harder than I imagined. They try to undermine me at every turn. I fear I will falter." The king shook his head slightly, his expression softening. "Fear is natural. It is the acknowledgement of what matters. But you will not falter. You have endured far more than this, and each challenge you overcome is another step toward the life you deserve." A moment of silence hung between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. The wind stirred softly, carrying the scent of blooming flowers from the gardens below, a reminder of beauty and resilience coexisting even in a world so often harsh and unforgiving. Lyra's gaze dropped, and she felt the weight of the day pressing against her chest. "I want to be brave," she confessed quietly, almost as if speaking the truth aloud. "Would make it real. Not just to face them, but to face myself. I want to believe that I am worthy of your trust, of everything you've shown me." The Alpha King stepped closer, his hand brushing hers in a gesture that was neither possessive nor commanding, but intimate in its quiet assurance. "You are worthy, Lyra," he said firmly. "Not because I say so, but because it is the truth of who you are. Courage, resilience, compassion, these are not given lightly. They exist in you already. My presence is merely a reflection of what you carry within yourself." Lyra's heart fluttered at his words, a mixture of hope, fear, and something deeper that she dared not yet name. For so long, she had equated acceptance with survival, love with conditional approval. And now, with him, she sensed a new possibility, a life where recognition, affection, and mutual respect were not only attainable but inevitable. The day passed with further trials, each one testing her ability to maintain composure and poise. The subtle manipulations of jealous alphas, the veiled insults from nobles who resented her sudden prominence, and the whispered gossip that followed her at every turn became a crucible in which her confidence and resilience were forged. Each moment she endured strengthened her resolve, and with every challenge, the Alpha King's quiet presence, his unwavering support, served as a reminder that she was not alone. As twilight fell, Lyra found herself once again in the gardens, the place that had become her sanctuary. The air was cool, carrying the soft scent of night-blooming flowers, and the fountain's waters glimmered in the fading light. She stood at its edge, staring at the reflection of her own eyes in the rippling surface, seeing for the first time not a timid Omega but someone capable of strength, courage, and grace. The Alpha King appeared beside her, silent yet undeniably present. "You are different now," he observed, his tone soft but resonant. "Not just in the way others see you, but in the way you see yourself. That is a victory far greater than any courtly triumph or superficial praise." Lyra turned to him, a faint blush warming her cheeks. "It feels overwhelming," she admitted. "To be noticed, to be tested, to be more than I ever thought I could be." He smiled, a rare, subtle curve of his lips that conveyed both pride and affection. "Overwhelming is the mark of change, Lyra. It is the sign that you are moving beyond the confines of your past, beyond the limitations others have imposed upon you. And that is something to be celebrated." The moment stretched, quiet and profound, as if the world itself had paused to acknowledge their bond. Lyra felt a surge of determination, a certainty that she had not known before. She would not allow jealousy, societal pressures, or fear to define her. With the Alpha King beside her, and with the strength she had discovered within herself, she knew she could face whatever trials awaited. As night fell and the first stars began to glimmer above, Lyra felt a sense of peace she had never experienced. The path ahead would be challenging, the court unrelenting in its scrutiny, but she no longer feared the journey. For the first time in her life, she believed in her own worth, in her own strength, and in the possibility of a future where she was seen, valued, and perhaps loved in ways she had only ever dreamed of. And in that moment, standing beneath the twinkling canopy of the night sky, Lyra understood something profound. Trials could not break her, jealousy could not diminish her, and with the right person by her side, even the harshest shadows could be illuminated by the light of courage and love. The days had become a rhythm of lessons, challenges, and quiet moments of revelation. Lyra had learned to navigate the court with a newfound grace, each interaction sharpening her instincts and fortifying her confidence. Yet, even with these small victories, a storm was brewing beneath the polished veneer of palace life. Whispers of jealousy had grown louder, subtle manipulations more daring, and the eyes that once simply observed her now followed her with an intensity that bordered on hostile. Lyra walked through the palace corridors with a deliberate calm, though her pulse raced beneath the surface. Every glance from the courtiers, every murmur from the corners of the hall, carried potential danger, potential humiliation. Yet beneath the fear, beneath the anxious calculation of her every step, there was also a flicker of determination, a growing belief in her own resilience. She had survived rejection. She had endured scrutiny. And with each passing day, she felt more capable of standing her ground, more worthy of the recognition she had long been denied. The Alpha King met her in the central courtyard, his expression grave yet composed. The sunlight glinted off the golden trim of his attire, casting a subtle halo of authority that made those nearby instinctively bow their heads in respect. To Lyra, however, his presence was less a display of power than a steadying anchor, a reminder that she was not alone in facing the trials that awaited her. "There are those who seek to challenge you," he said, his amber eyes steady and piercing. "Not all attacks are direct. Some are subtle, others insidious. You must be vigilant, but not fearful. Fear will weaken you. Confidence will fortify you." Lyra nodded, her fingers brushing against the folds of her gown. "I understand," she said softly, though her heart still fluttered. I have never been tested like this before. I am not sir. I am ready." He reached out, lightly touching her shoulder, a gesture of reassurance rather than dominance. "Readiness is a matter of perspective, Lyra. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it." And you are ready. I have seen your strength, your resolve. It will guide you when your mind wavers. The courtyard itself seemed to hold its breath as they walked together, side by side. Courtiers and nobles cast curious, scrutinizing glances in their direction, yet Lyra felt none of the old panic that would have gripped her in such moments. Instead, she felt the quiet assurance of being seen for who she truly was, recognized not for her station or the opinion of others, but for the strength and courage that had always existed within her. Their path led them to the edge of the palace gardens, where a secluded terrace overlooked the sprawling city below. Here, far from the gaze of prying eyes, Lyra felt the tension of the day release itself in small, almost imperceptible breaths. The wind stirred the leaves of ancient trees, carrying with it the scent of jasmine and rose, and for a moment, the world seemed suspended between possibility and challenge. You have grown stronger than you realize, the Alpha King continued, his voice carrying both authority and warmth. But growth alone will not shield you from those who seek to undermine you. There will come a moment when your resolve is tested, when the world demands more of you than you believe yourself capable of giving. That moment is approaching. Lyra's gaze fell to the city below, to the network of streets and homes that teemed with life and indifference alike. She understood, in a way that made her pulse quicken, that her journey had reached a critical juncture. The comforts of quiet observation were gone. Now, she would be forced to confront opposition, jealousy, and perhaps even betrayal, all while learning to trust in herself and in the bond she shared with the king. I will face it, she said finally, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Whatever comes, I will not falter. Not if you are with me, and not if I believe in myself. The king's expression softened, a rare warmth crossing his features. That is all I ask, Lyra. Belief in yourself is the foundation upon which everything else is built. And remember this, you are never truly alone. Not while I stand beside you. A sudden movement at the edge of the terrace drew Lyra's attention. A nobleman, one whose family had long harbored resentment for her unexpected rise in prominence, stepped forward with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Your Majesty, he said, inclining his head with what seemed like polite deference, it is remarkable how the court favors the most unexpected of candidates. His gaze flicked to Lyra, thinly veiled disdain lacing his words. Lyra felt a ripple of unease, but she met his gaze squarely, refusing to shrink away as she had done in the past. The king's hand brushed hers briefly, a silent reminder that she had allies in strength, and that courage was not an abstract notion but a tangible, shared force. You will not undermine me, she said, her voice quiet yet firm, carrying the authority she had begun to claim for herself. I will not allow jealousy to dictate my worth or my future. Your attempts are meaningless. The nobleman's expression faltered slightly, surprised at her confidence, and for the first time, Lyra noticed the weight of the court's attention, the subtle gasps, the murmurs, the realization that she was no longer a passive observer. She was a presence, a force, one whose courage and composure could not easily be dismissed. The Alpha King's amber eyes met hers, a silent affirmation of the bond they shared. Together, they faced the terrace, the city beyond, and the invisible currents of challenge that flowed through the court. Lyra understood, with a clarity that made her chest swell, that this was the moment she had been preparing for, not merely to survive the judgment of others, but to claim her rightful place in a world that had so long overlooked her. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Lyra felt a sense of purpose unlike any she had known. The crossroads of fate lay before her, fraught with challenge, yet illuminated by the steady light of courage, self-belief, and the unwavering support of the Alpha King. And in that twilight hour, standing side by side with him, Lyra realized that no trial, no jealousy, and no societal expectation could deter her from the path she was destined to walk, a path toward recognition, love, and the extraordinary life she had long been denied. The palace was cloaked in a quiet tension that morning, the kind that seemed to seep into every stone and echo off every gilded wall. Lyra moved cautiously through the corridors, the soft swish of her gown blending with the muted footsteps of servants and guards. The air carried an almost imperceptible weight, a tension that whispered of scrutiny, judgment, and expectation. It was the day of a trial unlike any she had faced before, not one marked by ceremony or celebration, but a test of trust, character, and courage that could define her standing within the court. She paused near a sunlit balcony, gazing out at the sprawling gardens below. The scent of jasmine and roses, so familiar and comforting, offered little solace today. Her pulse quickened, a drumbeat of nerves and anticipation, but beneath it there was also a strange thrill, a recognition that her life, her choices, and her courage were about to be tested in ways she had never imagined. The Alpha King appeared beside her, his approach silent, almost regal. He carried the same calm authority that had drawn her trust over these past weeks, yet there was something in his eyes today, a flicker of intensity that spoke of the stakes involved. Today is not merely a test of patience, he said softly, his amber gaze fixed on hers. It is a test of trust. Trust in yourself, in your strength, and in the bond we share. The world may seek to undermine it, but we will face it together. Lyra's lips parted, and she struggled to find words that would convey both her apprehension and her resolve. I will try, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, though steady with determination. I want to prove to them, and to myself, that I am capable. He smiled faintly, a rare warmth softening his otherwise commanding presence. Trying is not enough, Lyra. You will act. You will decide. You will rise. And I will be here, as always, to ensure you never falter alone. The trial began in the Great Hall, where nobles and alphas alike had gathered to witness the day's events. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Whispers traveled faster than light, and every gaze seemed fixed upon her with expectation, curiosity, or veiled disdain. Lyra stepped forward, her heart hammering, but she held her head high. The gown she wore, elegant yet understated, flowed around her like a gentle declaration of presence. She was no longer invisible, no longer timid. Every movement she made was deliberate, a quiet assertion of the strength she had discovered within herself. The first test was subtle, psychological. Nobles questioned her intentions, scrutinized her past, and sought to find faults where none existed. Yet Lyra remained composed, answering with honesty, confidence, and a poise that surprised even some of the most skeptical observers. She realized that this trial was not about perfection, it was about integrity, authenticity, and the courage to stand unwavering when the world demanded otherwise. Midway through the proceedings, a particularly bold alpha stepped forward, his tone sharp and challenging. Why should the court accept you? He demanded. You have no history of prominence, no record of achievement. What makes you worthy of such attention? Lyra's chest tightened, but she drew a deep breath, recalling the lessons she had learned in the days past. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. She met his gaze evenly, her amber eyes reflecting not defiance, but quiet certainty. I am worthy, she said, her voice steady and resonant. Not because of status, nor because of past failures, but because of the strength I carry within me. I have faced rejection, scrutin. Why, and fear, yet I stand here, unbroken, resolute, and committed to walking my path with integrity. That is what makes me worthy. A hush fell over the hall, the weight of her words settling into the minds of those present. Some faces softened with grudging respect, others tightened with renewed envy. Yet for the first time, Lyra felt a surge of triumph, not in the acceptance of others, but in the recognition of her own voice, her own power, and her own truth. The Alpha King's gaze met hers across the hall, a silent acknowledgement that carried more weight than any words could convey. In that glance, Lyra found reassurance, validation, and a sense of unity that made her pulse steady and her spirit strong. The final test was more intimate, more personal. She was asked to navigate a scenario of trust, where her decisions would affect not only herself but also those around her. It was a situation designed to expose fear, hesitation, and doubt, but it was also an opportunity to demonstrate wisdom, compassion, and courage. Lyra approached it carefully, yet decisively, weighing her choices with both heart and mind. Each action she took, each decision she made, reflected not only her growing understanding of herself but also the bond she shared with the king. By the end of the day, it was clear that the trial had been passed, not with perfection, but with dignity, resilience, and strength. Lyra felt a quiet pride in herself, a sense of accomplishment that was entirely her own. For the first time in her life, she understood that validation did not come solely from others' approval, but from the courage to face challenges and remain true to oneself. As night descended over the palace, Lyra returned to the gardens, the familiar sanctuary that had witnessed her growth and transformation. The fountain shimmered under the moonlight, its gentle ripples reflecting both the stars above and the quiet triumph within her. The Alpha King joined her, his presence a steady anchor in the stillness. "You have done well," he said, his voice a blend of pride and warmth. "Today was not easy, but you faced it with integrity, courage, and wisdom. That is what defines a strong heart and a capable spirit." Lyra's eyes softened, and she smiled, a rare, genuine expression that reflected the depth of her gratitude and relief. I could not have done it without your guidance," she admitted. "You helped me believe in myself when I could not." He reached out, taking her hand in a gesture of quiet affirmation. "No, Lyra, you did this yourself. I only reminded you of what you already carried within. Trust in yourself, as I trust in you, and you will never falter." As they stood together beneath the stars, Lyra realized that the trial had been more than a challenge of the court, it had been a turning point in her life. She was no longer a rejected, overlooked Omega. She was a woman of strength, resilience, and courage, ready to face the world and embrace the love, recognition, and happiness she had long been denied. The palace was unusually silent that evening, the corridors and chambers steeped in an anticipatory stillness that seemed to hum with unspoken expectation. Lyra moved through the halls with careful steps, her gown whispering against the polished marble floors. She had walked these halls countless times over the past weeks, yet tonight felt different, heavier, charged with the tension of impending revelation. Every glance she cast, every footstep she took, seemed amplified, echoing off the walls in a way that reminded her that the court's eyes were ever watchful, measuring, judging. The day had been a gauntlet of whispered intrigues and veiled challenges, each encounter a reminder that her place within the court was never guaranteed. Yet Lyra had grown accustomed to the scrutiny. She had learned to carry herself with quiet dignity, to meet criticism with composure, and to trust not in the approval of others, but in the strength she had cultivated within herself. Still, the knowledge that tonight would demand more than composure, that it would demand truth, pressed upon her chest with a weight she could neither ignore nor fully anticipate. The Alpha King found her in the grand hall, where the soft glow of lanterns cast flickering shadows along the ornate tapestries. He moved with the effortless grace of authority, yet there was a gentleness in his approach, a quiet reassurance that made the tension in her chest ease slightly. "Tonight is not about the court," he said, his amber eyes locking with hers, steady and unwavering. "Tonight is about truth, Lyra. The truth of who you are, who you have become, and the strength of the bond we share. Everything else is secondary." Lyra swallowed, the words resonating within her. Truth had always been elusive, shaped by rejection, filtered through judgment, and twisted by fear. But tonight, she understood that honesty would be her shield and her sword. Whatever trials lay ahead, she would face them with clarity, integrity, and courage. The first portion of the evening's events was ceremonial, a public acknowledgement of her rising status within the palace. Noble families, some skeptical, others grudgingly respectful, observed as she took her place beside the Alpha King. The whispers followed her, subtle and sharp, yet Lyra felt a growing sense of resolve. She was no longer merely surviving in the shadow of scrutiny. She was present, deliberate, and unyielding. The true test came later, behind closed doors in a chamber lined with heavy velvet drapes and flickering candlelight. Here, she was confronted not with the judgment of the court, but with the personal challenges that had defined her journey. Old fears surfaced, the echo of rejection, the sting of being overlooked, the anxiety that had once consumed her at every misstep. But alongside them was a newfound clarity, a recognition that she was capable of facing these fears head-on. "You must decide," the Alpha King said, his voice low and deliberate, resonating in the intimate chamber. "Not for the court, not for their expectations, but for yourself. The path before you is yours to claim, Lyra. It requires courage, honesty, and the willingness to embrace the future fully, without hesitation." Lyra's pulse quickened. She had faced trials before, yes, but this was different. This was the culmination of everything she had endured, every whispered insult, every sly glance, every moment of doubt. And now, the choice was hers. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle like a stone within her chest. "I choose to stand," she said, her voice firm, unwavering. "Not because of fear or expectation, but because I am ready. Ready to claim my life, my strength, and my place in this world. Ready to embrace what I am, what I have become, and the bond I share with you." The Alpha King's eyes softened, and he extended his hand. "Then you have passed the crucible," he said quietly. "Not because the court or circumstance dictated it, but because you acted with integrity, courage, and heart. That is the essence of true strength." A silence followed, profound and unbroken, as if the room itself acknowledged the significance of the moment. Lyra felt a surge of relief and triumph, a sensation so deep it seemed to resonate through her very bones. She had faced the shadows of her past, the scrutiny of the court, and the fear within herself, and she had emerged unbroken, steadfast, and luminous. As they stepped back into the courtyard, the moon had risen high above the palace, bathing the gardens in silver light. The fountains shimmered, reflecting the stars like tiny shards of hope scattered across the night. Lyra turned to the Alpha King, her heart swelling with gratitude and a quiet, burgeoning love. "You have taught me more than I ever imagined possible," she said softly. "Not just about courage, but about believing in myself, about seeing worth where I once saw none. I am ready for what comes next." He took her hand gently, a gesture both tender and resolute. "And you will face it, not alone, Lyra, but together. Every challenge, every trial, every joy, we will face them side by side." In that moment, under the canopy of stars and the gentle shimmer of the palace fountains, Lyra felt a profound sense of completion and possibility. The journey that had begun with rejection, fear, and uncertainty had led her to a place of empowerment, love, and recognition. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer uncertain. She was herself, strong, capable, and ready to embrace the happiness she had long been denied. And as the night deepened, Lyra realized that the crucible had not merely tested her, it had transformed her. She had claimed her truth, her courage, and her heart. And with the Alpha King by her side, she knew that the future was hers to shape, filled with promise, love, and the fulfillment of a life finally lived in the light of recognition and joy. The first light of morning spilled gently across the palace, painting the marble floors and gilded corridors with a soft, golden glow. For Lyra, this morning felt different from any she had ever experienced, a dawn not only in the literal sense, but a dawn of her life itself. The trials, the whispers, the doubts, and the moments of fear that had long shadowed her existence seemed to recede like a tide finally pulling away, leaving only clarity, warmth, and a sense of unshakable belonging. She rose from her bed, her movements deliberate and unhurried, feeling the fabric of her gown brush against her skin like a quiet affirmation of her newfound strength. The palace was waking, but there was no tension in the air this morning, only a soft hum of life, the promise of possibility, and the serene beauty of a day that felt like it had been waiting just for her. The Alpha King awaited her in the grand hall, his presence steady, commanding, yet suffused with the gentle warmth that had become her anchor. The amber of his eyes, so familiar and unwavering, held a depth that spoke of pride, admiration, and something far more tender, an unspoken acknowledgement of the journey they had endured together. "Good morning, Lyra," he said, his voice low and measured, carrying the calm authority she had come to rely upon. "Today marks not a continuation of trials, but the beginning of a life that is truly yours. You have faced every challenge, endured every scrutiny, and emerged stronger than any doubt could touch. And now, it is time to embrace what you have earned." Lyra felt her chest tighten with emotion, a mixture of relief, pride, and an almost overwhelming joy. I feel as if I am finally seeing the world as it was meant to be," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of her journey. "Not as a place of rejection or judgment, but as a place where I can stand, truly stand, and be seen for who I am." He stepped closer, closing the space between them, and for a moment, the palace itself seemed to fade into the background, leaving only the two of them, standing beneath the high arches and soft morning light. "And you are seen, Lyra," he said gently, his words steady, unwavering. "By me, by those who matter, and, most importantly, by yourself. That is the beginning of freedom, the recognition of your worth, your courage, and your right to happiness. The courtyard beyond was alive with life. Nobles and courtiers moved with purpose, yet today their eyes held respect rather than judgment. Whispers of jealousy and envy had been replaced with acknowledgement of her strength, of the grace and courage she had displayed through countless trials. The palace, once a labyrinth of tension and scrutiny, now felt like a sanctuary, a place where she could breathe freely, unburdened by doubt and fortified by self-assurance. As the morning unfolded, the Alpha King led her through the gardens, the sun illuminating every flower, every fountain, and every pathway as if the world itself celebrated her triumph. Lyra walked beside him, her steps light, her heart buoyant, and with each moment, she felt more certain of the path she had chosen, the path of courage, authenticity, and love. They arrived at a secluded terrace overlooking the city, a place that had witnessed her trials, her moments of doubt, and her small victories. Today, however, it was a stage for something entirely different: celebration, acknowledgement, and the quiet magic of a new beginning. Lyra paused, taking in the view, the sprawling streets, the glimmering roofs, the distant hills bathed in sunlight. "It feels endless," she murmured. "Like the possibilities stretch on forever." The Alpha King took her hand, his touch firm yet tender. "They do," he said simply. "And now you will walk among them not as a shadow, not as someone overlooked, but as the woman you have become, strong, courageous, and worthy of everything you desire." He guided her to the center of the terrace, where a small gathering of trusted allies, friends, and dignitaries awaited. Their expressions were warm, approving, and respectful, a stark contrast to the scrutiny and skepticism that had defined her past. Here, there was only acceptance, admiration, and quiet celebration of the journey she had endured. One by one, they offered gestures of acknowledgement, their words carrying the weight of recognition and respect. Lyra met each gaze, each smile, with gratitude, her own confidence radiating outward. She realized, with a profound clarity, that she had not only survived the challenges of the palace and the court, but she had transformed those challenges into proof of her own resilience and worth. Finally, the Alpha King turned to her, his expression both solemn and tender. "Lyra," he said, his voice carrying the weight of his heart, "you have faced every trial, conquered every fear, and emerged stronger than I could have imagined. Today is not just a celebration of your courage, it is a promise. A promise that you will never face world alone, that your worth will never again be questioned, and that together, we will embrace the life and happiness you deserve." Lyra felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but they were tears of triumph, relief, and profound joy. I cannot believe how far I have come," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion within. "From rejection, fear, and doubt, to this. To being seen, accepted, and loved. Truly loved." The Alpha King drew her close, enveloping her in a protective, tender embrace. "And you are," he whispered. "Every day, every moment, you are loved. Not because of what you have endured, but because of who you are. Strong, beautiful, courageous, and endlessly worthy." The sun rose higher, casting the palace and gardens in radiant light. Lyra felt a warmth that went beyond the morning sun, a profound sense of belonging and peace. She was no longer a rejected, overlooked Omega. She was a woman who had claimed her place, her power, and her heart. And with the Alpha King by her side, she knew that every moment ahead would be filled with love, joy, and the certainty of a life fully lived. Hand in hand, they stepped forward together, their steps in harmony, their hearts aligned, ready to embrace the boundless possibilities of a future they would build side by side. The palace, the court, the whispers of the past, all of it faded into insignificance compared to the promise of a life now defined by courage, love, and the fulfillment of every dream Lyra had once thought impossible. For in that moment, under the brilliant light of the new day, Lyra understood the most profound truth of all. She had not only found her place in the world, but she had also found her heart's home. And it was here, in the arms of the Alpha King, that her story, long shadowed by rejection and doubt, finally blossomed into a life of joy, love, and endless possibility. The future stretched before her, limitless and bright, and Lyra stepped into it with unwavering courage, a full heart, and the certainty that happiness, once elusive, was now hers to embrace completely. The dawn broke over the palace in a cascade of gold and rose, spilling light across the marble halls and the flowering gardens. Birds sang their morning songs, carrying a sense of serenity that had once seemed impossibly distant to Lyra. Today was not just another day, it was the culmination of a journey filled with fear, trials, and uncertainty. It was the day when everything she had endured, everything she had fought to overcome, would finally settle into peace, belonging, and joy. Lyra stood by the balcony overlooking the gardens, the soft morning breeze lifting strands of her hair and caressing her cheeks. For a long moment, she simply breathed, letting the warmth of the sun seep into her chest. Letting the faint scent of roses remind her of the sanctuary she had found in this palace, in this life. Her heart, which had once been heavy with rejection and doubt, now felt light, steady, and open. The Alpha King appeared at her side, his presence as commanding and grounding as ever, but with a tenderness that spoke of trust, intimacy, and unwavering devotion. His amber eyes, warm and steady, met hers, and in that gaze, she felt the echo of every trial she had faced, every victory she had claimed, and every step she had taken towards self-realization. "You've grown beyond anything I could have hoped for," he said softly, his voice a comforting anchor. Stronger, braver, and more radiant than ever. "Today, the world sees not just the woman who stumbled into my arms at the mating ritual, but the woman who has earned her place, her voice, and her happiness." Lyra's lips curved into a gentle smile, tears shimmering in her eyes. "I never imagined this life," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "I never imagined being seen, being respected, being loved so wholly." He reached for her hand, his touch firm yet gentle, a promise of protection and partnership. "You've earned it, Lyra. Every step of the way, you've claimed it with courage, honesty, and heart. No one can take this from you, and no one can diminish your light." The palace itself seemed to echo with the significance of the moment. The halls that had once carried whispers of jealousy now hummed with acknowledgement and respect. Courtiers who had questioned her place now observed her with quiet admiration, not merely for her status beside the king, but for the undeniable strength she radiated. Together, they walked through the gardens, the sunlight illuminating the blossoms and the paths they had walked countless times before. Yet today, the paths felt new, symbolic of the life she had built, the confidence she had nurtured, and the love she had found. Every flower, every fountain, every rustle of leaves seemed to celebrate her triumph, as if nature itself acknowledged her journey from rejection to recognition, from fear to courage. The final moments of her trial had been internal, a confrontation with every shadow that had ever haunted her. She had faced fear, doubt, and the ghosts of past rejection, and emerged stronger, more radiant, and fully herself. The Alpha King had guided her, yes, but it was her own heart, her own courage, and her own unwavering belief in the possibility of a better life that had carried her through. He paused near the fountain, drawing her close, their hands entwined. "Lyra," he said, his voice low and resonant, "this is more than a union of hearts. It is a testament to your strength, your perseverance, and your ability to embrace the future with rage. Together, we face it not as two separate souls, but as one. And today, the world celebrates that truth." Lyra's heart swelled. She pressed her forehead to his, letting the warmth of his presence infuse her being. "I am ready," she whispered, her voice steady, yet filled with awe. "Ready to live fully, to love freely, and to never let fear or doubt rule me again." The king smiled, a rare, genuine expression that softened his commanding presence. "Then it begins," he said. "Not a life of trials or shadows, but a life of light, of love, and of joy. Everything you have dreamed of, everything you deserve, it starts now." As the sun climbed higher, spilling brilliance across the palace and gardens, Lyra felt a surge of joy so profound it left her breathless. The path that had once been uncertain, fraught with challenges and whispered judgments, now stretched wide before her, open, radiant, and full of promise. She no longer feared the gaze of others, for she had come to see herself clearly. She was strong, she was worthy, and she was loved beyond measure. The Alpha King drew her into a gentle embrace, holding her close, and for the first time in her life, Lyra allowed herself to fully believe in the life she had longed for. Love, acceptance, respect, these were no longer distant dreams, no longer fragile hopes. They were real, tangible, and hers to hold. And as they stood together, bathed in the morning light, Lyra felt the final chains of rejection, fear, and doubt fall away. The palace, the court, the trials, they were all behind her now. What lay ahead was a life of partnership, of joy, of laughter, and of love that would never falter. Lyra lifted her gaze to the horizon, the world stretching endlessly before her, and for the first time, she saw it not as a place of obstacles, but as a canvas for the life she would create. And with the Alpha King's hand in hers, the bond between them unbreakable, she stepped forward with certainty, heart open, and spirit free. This was the dawn of her new beginning, the embrace of her destiny, and the fulfillment of every hope she had ever carried. Rejected no longer, she was seen, she was loved, and she was finally home. The palace, the gardens, the light, all bore witness to it. The Omega who had fallen into the Alpha King's arms, and the love, courage, and joy that had transformed her life forever.